to John and let him go.
Great. Thanks, Megan. And thanks everybody for joining this kickoff to the 2018 webinar monthly series. Glad you could make it this afternoon. And as Megan said, the focus of this webinar, although we cover strategic planning, implementation, and validation services, the focus of this one is definitely software validation, speaking about more than just the vendor documentation. So with that in mind, I'll give a little bit of a introduction of myself so you know who you're listening to. As mentioned, my name is John Zank. I'm the delivery manager at CSols for validation services. So the group that I'm responsible for within the company handles all software validation within the regulated laboratory space. So CSols as a whole, our specialty and expertise is within LIMS systems. So we do have experience validating the top tier LIMS systems, as well as some other typical laboratory systems such as chromatography data systems, some benchtop and instrument systems as well. Myself, I have over 19 years experience in with computer systems validation, and that's across the regulated industry in GLP, GMP, and also do have a little bit of GCP as well in there. I've worked in large pharma, contract research, biopharm, worked with vaccines, and also on the IT side with network and infrastructure qualification. A member of the Society of Quality Assurance, and also former member of the Computer Validation Initiative Committee as well, dealing with current trends of computer system validation, and interacting with other companies within the industry, as well as some FDA regulators. And although I'm presenting today, I also want to give some acknowledgement to two individuals who helped prepare this presentation within CSols as well, and that's Mike Barkin and Amy Zwart. They provided some insight, input, and I will be going through the presentation. So let's move on to agenda. Just kind of as most agendas are, give you a quick little overview of what I'd like to address today, and hopefully what you'll be able to focus on and take away from this presentation. So some terminology up front, just to kind of level set. I think sometimes it's helpful, even though we might be using some common terms as we discuss these items. It's good just to level set and make sure everyone understands what I mean when I reference certain words. Then just dive right into what the vendor documentation is and the responsibility of the vendor as well when it comes to validating software. Discuss what regulated company, which I'm assuming the listeners today, all of you in attendance, what responsibilities you have when it comes to validating your laboratory informatics software, and then how to leverage for compliance and assessing risk the vendor documentation, and wrap it up with some frequently asked questions that we get within CSols as we work on projects throughout the industry and summarize the presentation for you. So in terms of terminology, there's just 4 terms I'd like to just bring up at the beginning. Because we're talking about vendor documentation, just wanted to clarify that what I mean by vendor, and as you see on the second point there, when I'm using the term vendor, it's also synonymous with developer. And if you're familiar with the GAMP documentation, it's also referred to as supplier within GAMP. So even though those 3, vendor, developer, and supplier, kind of, as I mentioned, they're synonymous, I'm going to stick with vendor as much as possible throughout the presentation. And that just refers to any developer of a LIMS software for use in a regulated environment. And ultimately, they're responsible for proving that their system works as they developed it, right? And when I speak about regulated companies, that would be any end user of a LIMS system in a regulated environment, and ultimately being responsible for proving the system works based on the intended use of that company. Out of the box, or if you're familiar with the acronym OOTB, Um, Simply put, that's any functionality that's provided by a vendor available upon installation. So think of it as soon as you crack the seal and install, fire it up and get into the system. Whatever is there to start with is out of the box. Once you start doing things beyond that in terms of setting any configuration or maybe setting up calculations, entering in some static data, anything beyond what's there then takes you outside that realm of out of the box. And as we're talking about validation, there isn't one easy definition anywhere for what validation is, and it can vary depending on who you talk to, but for purposes of this presentation, what I really wanted to focus on from this definition, just so you know where it came from, this one in particular is from a final guidance for industry by the FDA, for the FDA and staff. It was General Principles of Software Validation. And I bolded the important part that reference throughout this presentation, and that's validation is conforming to user needs and intended uses. That's really what it boils down to, is focusing on how you're going to use the system in your environment based on your needs. And also, I'd just like to throw up this graphic, traditional V model, if you're familiar with it as well, from within the GAMP framework on computer system validation. What I really wanted to show with this graphic is how, if we look at the V model, when we're going from the bottom, that's really where a vendor is, the sole purpose of the vendor, right? And where they're really involved is to build that system. Then as you slowly move up, it's that arrow to the left there shows the responsibility, how that shifts from the vendor up to you as a regulated company and use in your environment.